Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Now, this evening, we haven't got a special guest, or should I say, instead of a special guest, we're going to interact a bit more with the viewers. So I've got various topics to talk about. We will move on to those later. As usual, I'll start with a little bit of family party news. Coming up next week on the live stream, we've got John William Noble, who's going to be talking about marriage, and the book is written on that topic recently. And the week after that, we've got Phil Holden. Now, Phil Holden is the new deputy leader of the Scottish Family Party. So we're going to have a chat with him. He's a very interesting character. What else is in the news? We've got our manifesto launch tomorrow morning. Do join us for that. Again, live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. That's just 11 in the morning till 11:40. So quite short and sharp. And we'll be myself, Michael Willis, and Philip Tanzer will be there. And we'll talk about some aspects of the manifesto and also answer questions. Now, here's our manifesto. It's just arrived a few minutes ago. So we're going to be talking through some of those issues. Now, we've invited the media to that. That's why we've done it in the daytime. Maybe a journalist or two might come along to ask a question. To be honest, they probably won't. It's been interesting over the last few days. You see various tiny, virtually non-existent parties launching or saying something or whatever, or announcing their candidates, and it gets an article in the newspapers. One newspaper after another. When we present the newspapers with a real story, poll results or something really substantial, won't touch it. It just becomes more and more obvious as time goes on that the media are just hostile to us. In fact, I'll maybe show you this in a video. But if you've got an Alexa, ask it about the Scottish Family Party. Say, what is the Scottish Family Party? If you say, what is the SNP? It says, according to Wikipedia. Then it reads some stuff from Wikipedia. This is all exactly what the SNP wants you to read. If you say, what is the Scottish Family Party? It doesn't need to go to Wikipedia. Alexa knows already and tells you straight away what the Scottish Family Party is. And it's not the most flattering description. I'll maybe make a video about that soon. Our crowdfunder, our election crowdfunder, has been going extremely well. We raised 10,000 before we even started it. We set a very ambitious target of another 10,000 with the crowdfunder. And as we speak, we're about £1,000 short. That's all of our very ambitious target. This was to enable us to get a flyer through every letterbox in Scotland, which we're now going to be able to do. But if we hit our target, that will just be a bit more slack in the system. We'll be able to spend a bit more on social media, advertising, etc. So if you do want to chip into the crowdfunder, it closes about tomorrow tea time, I think. So this really is your last chance. You can find it under YouTube videos or pinned to the top of the Facebook page. We'd appreciate any last minute contributions. Now, so I hope to see you tomorrow morning at the manifesto launch. The other thing there is, do have a question ready. If you'd like to ask a question as well, you'll be able to type in a question. We'll bring them on screen and answer some of those questions. Let me just get the comments up here. Right, so I'll try and interact with the comments a bit more this evening. Now, what I do is I have a tray on my desk. And when I see things in the news, if it's something I think would be worth talking about sometime, I'll just print it out and put it on my tray. And it's been quite a while since I've got to talk about any of them. So I've got a pretty big wodge of things I've printed out. So this evening, I'm going to go through some of them. We can have a talk about them and see what direction we head in. We're never going to get through the whole lot. Right, number one, the SNP's new policy to tackle population decline. Now, previously, you might have heard me talking about this. Population decline is a real problem in Scotland. The fertility rate is about 1.39, needs to be about 2.1 for the population to sustain itself. So basically, Scotland is facing population decline and an aging population. There are a lot of problems with that, particularly for the economy. So the SNP's solution, I've always said the SNP's solution, the only thing they can think of is mass immigration. But they've had a new idea now. Do you want to hear what their new idea is for tackling population decline? Free IVF fertility treatment for single women. Free IVF treatment for single women. So in other words, to encourage single women to have fatherless children. That's the SNP's policy. Now, what they could have done, they could have looked at families and thought, now, what could we do so that families would choose to have more children? Because quite often, if you look at statistics from around the world, if you ask people how many children they would have liked to have had, and how many they actually have. Generally, people report they would have liked to have had more children than they actually have. So if you can remove barriers that deter people from having children, they'll probably have more children. Was the SNP interested in that? Not a bit. Nothing at all. That's what our policies are designed to do. The SNP instead wants to help single women, I say, to have fatherless children with sperm donors, we assume. Now, the first question we're going to ask about this is, why just for women? Why not help single men to have children as well by surrogacy and egg donation? Is this not a bit sexist? But anyway, they're targeting women. Now, I've been reading a book about this recently, about the consequences for children. Oh, sorry, my lights just collapsed there. Just be a minute. Right, sorry about that. Moved this book and my big light fell over. Yes, this is about the consequences for children of various unorthodox family forms. And it goes through them chapter by chapter. And there's a chapter about donor-conceived children and the effect it has on them. I'll just read a couple for you. I mean, you assume the SNP are just completely ignorant of any of these effects on children, either ignorant, willfully ignorant, or just ignorant, I'm not sure. Mum told me when I was a child all about how desperate she was for a baby and how much I was wanted and I was special. It doesn't feel like that. I'm middle-aged now, but I went through a phase of kidding myself it doesn't matter, but it does. It always has, if I'm honest. I felt disconnected for as long as I can remember, like a fake, artificial. And children conceived through sperm donation, these are the results of research, are more likely to experience profound struggles with their origins and identities, have family relationships more often characterized by confusion, tension, and loss, have experienced divorce and multiple family transitions in their families of origin, struggle with serious negative outcomes such as delinquency, substance abuse, and depression. And the SNP thinks, right, this is the way forward. We want to produce more children who are likely to experience these outcomes. I mean, words fail. I mean, how can you describe a government whose policy is to deliberately produce children who are going to face these problems? Because they're going to come into the world with that sense of loss of identity and lack of a father. And here's another little quotation from someone born with a sperm donor. I do not have a father or the sense of identity that goes with one. I do not have any knowledge of half of my roots, my father, my medical history. So every time a doctor asks me, any family history of, I have to tell them that I do not and cannot know. And this book's got pages and pages of similar stories. The other thing it says in the book, it says that what society effectively does to these children is it gaslights them. In other words, it causes them to doubt their insanity. Because if they were to express that, they would say, it doesn't feel right that I haven't got a dad. It was a donor. I don't like that. Society's message is, how dare you? How dare you say that? That's very homophobic and bigoted or whatever. So basically, you just shut up and be thankful that you're here. Be thankful that you're alive. And we don't really want to hear about the problems you're experiencing. That's the context that they're growing up in. But to say it's not stopping the SNP. Will any other parties oppose this? Of course not. Now, this is one of those areas where I talk about quite often, saying anti-woke is not enough. It's all very well seeing how crazy some of the trans things are, like some of the aspects of feminism. I mean, it is almost comical, the lengths that they go to, or pulling statues down or whatever. People can see that. That's the easy to understand level of someone called it recently like bar stool conservatism. That's the sort of thing that will get people fired up on Twitter and things will fly on social media. But an issue like this, not really. People don't get so worked up. It's not quite so obvious what the problem is. But this is actually a very, very serious issue. And as I say, it will be completely ignored in the Scottish Parliament. The government has announced this policy. They wouldn't have the slightest concern that this was going to be controversial, because they would expect the media to ask no difficult question. They would expect no other politician to ask any difficult questions as well. I mean, the things that will increase fertility, I mean, encouraging marriage, helping parents to buy homes of a suitable size. There's lots of things you can do. I'm going to make a video about it soon. But instead, the Scottish government goes for free IVF for single women. But I think that is, this is during the week when the Scottish government has been virtue signaling left, right, and centre the fact that it's incorporated the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. Children's rights. That's what it's all about, the government says. Centre of what they do. Right to a mum and a dad, well, they don't matter. They're not bothered about that. So in other words, the most fundamental rights, I mean, for a start, being born, they're not bothered about that one. They're also not bothered about a child's right to be brought up by and known by their own mother and father. Something is far wrong there with the government and with the opposition parties as well, because basically they are not interested in it at all. Okay, help to buy. Yeah. Being able to afford a suitable house is a very significant factor in fertility rates. Apparently in America, the states where land is cheapest are the states where the fertility rate is highest. That's a very strong correlation. Now, the way you achieve that, help to buy is not our policy approach, but to enable the building of houses that are going to be suitable for families certainly is. Okay, right, let's move on to the next thing. Right, Douglas Ross of the Scottish Conservatives. He's made a bold pitch to female voters as he kicks off the Tory election campaign. Now, what do you think he's saying? What do you think his offer is to women? What does he assume that all women are just desperate for? You guessed it, childcare. You after-school policy for children in primaries 1 to 3 would give the opportunity to thousands of Scottish women with the promise that they do not have to give up their job to look after their child. What it actually means is they don't have to look after their child because the state will do it for them and they can go off and work instead. But as with all the other parties, the assumption is that what all mothers are clamoring for, they're just saying, please, 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 I don't want to be with my own kids. I want to be at work instead. So government, please help me to do that. Please look after my kids for me. But there's a lot of mums who are not thinking that. I mean, if some mums are thinking that, that's fine by us, but an awful lot are not. A lot are thinking what they would prefer to do would be to have more time with their own kids and not need to work as much. So we would want to make the tax and benefit system fairer to enable mums to make that choice. But every party in the Scottish Parliament, and pretty well everyone outside the Scottish Parliament as well, political parties, they assume that's not what families want. It just doesn't come into their head. Right, what else has he got in his pitch to women? It said they want to tackle violence against women and girls. Well, who doesn't? Who doesn't want to tackle violence against anyone? Criminal violence. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? But in presenting that something particularly for women, well, they're sort of playing the identity politics game a little bit with that. It says they're going to repeal the hate crime bill. I'm not quite sure what that had to do with women. But again, the Conservatives are trying to say we're the people who opposed the hate crime bill. But if you watch my videos, they didn't oppose it all the way through. They opposed parts of it at some stages. They capitulated on freedom of speech protections. They were not strong opposition to the hate speech legislation. But the other thing that Douglas Ross and the Conservatives are offering to women is a law that says if a murderer refuses to reveal the location of his victim, then he won't be allowed out of prison early. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure that's really top of the priority for many women. I mean, I would absolutely agree with them that that's a good law. But is that really the best they've got to offer to women? Whereas I think what we're offering is something for a variety of women. At the moment, all of political policy is skewed towards helping families with both parents going to work. And they assume that's what women want. We say we want to give women choice. Right, let's see, what do we got? Right, next thing, what do we got here? SPUC, I don't know if you're familiar with SPUC, Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. Fantastic organization. I'd recommend anyone follow them on social media or get involved. They have a conference when these things are allowed. It's very, very good. But they've done an election briefing this year to help people to work out how to use their vote to promote the pro-life cause. Now, what it says contact the candidates and ask them how they would vote on various pro-life issues. It says that for your constituency. It also says do the same for the list vote. Ask them about, ask the lead candidate or the second place candidate what their view is. But I thought, surely, does the party not come into it? If you vote, let's say, for example, for someone in the Scottish Green Party or the Lib Dems or the Labour Party, you're voting for a party that wants full decriminalisation of abortion. I mean, the abortion situation is horrific as it is, but they would make it even worse as a matter of policy and allow abortion up to full term for any reason. Okay, so that's the policy of Labour, Lib Dems, and the Greens. So do you really need to phone up? Do you really need to write to the candidate? Email them? Not really. The fact that they're saying, I am a Lib Dem candidate, I am a Labour Party candidate, they're already telling you what government policy they support. Right, what if in the SNP? Well, the SNP's policy, they're in charge. I mean, are they a pro-life party? Well, of course they're not. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is very enthusiastic about abortion, rejoicing in it, no less. That's what they do. They also fund organizations that argue for full decriminalization of abortion. So if you vote for an SNP candidate, you're voting for the SNP, which is a definitely pro-abortion party. Now, let's say you email the MSP and they reply saying, oh, yeah, I'm actually pro-life. Okay, what effect does it have if you vote for them? Does that mean you're advancing the pro-life cause? Not really. The best you might get is they might vote the right way if it comes to a vote in the Parliament. But you're not going to get much more of that. Because if they're in the SNP, could they be the great pro-life campaigner in Scotland from their position of being an SNP MSP? No, they couldn't be, because they'd get the sack. So even if they believe the right things, even if it's one of the tiny handful who are actually pro-life, in voting for them, you don't actually advance the pro-life cause. Well, look at the Conservatives. Conservatives would say, oh, it's a matter of conscience. The Conservative government have been in power in Britain for years and years. Okay, are they a pro-life party? Of course not. They're perfectly happy for abortion to continue. So if you vote for a Conservative candidate, that's what you're voting for. Again, even if there's an individual candidate who's pro-life, they won't be a pro-life campaigner in the Parliament. Whereas if you vote for a Scottish Family Party candidate or with a Scottish Family Party on the list, you are promoting the pro-life agenda. Because a Family Party candidate just wouldn't sit there and maybe just vote the right way every 3 years when a vote came up. They would be taking the initiative, opening up the debate, campaigning, and getting the issue into the media and into the national debate. And that's what you really need. So I would suggest maybe emailing your candidates. I would suggest don't bother. Just look up their party policies and make your decision like that. Is there a Family Party candidate for North Lanarkshire? We'll have candidates in every region. So everyone in Scotland will be able to vote for the Scottish Family Party with their second vote. And we've got candidates in 7 constituencies as well. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. Edinburgh Pentlands is one, Edinburgh South is another, and there's some others scattered around Scotland. Right, what have we got next? Let's move on. RSHP, our friends at the Relationship, Sexual Health and Parenthood resources, the vulgar and disgusting, corrupting sex education resources that the Scottish Government recommends for schools. I'm just looking through them the other day. What they've got to say about marriage, because one of our policies is children need to learn about marriage. You just tell them the facts, tell them the statistics relating to marriage. How does it work out for people if they get married, and if they don't? I mean, just presenting the facts is a pretty powerful message in itself. And also to understand the philosophy of marriage. What's it for? Why is it an important social institution? What's it there to protect against? What's it there to achieve? So against all of that, I had a look at the government sex education resources. to see what their lesson about marriage is. This is third and fourth levels. This is towards the top of high school. This is the most advanced teaching about marriage. Right, these are the success criteria for the lesson. So if they've got this, the lesson's gone well. I can talk about the importance of communication, honesty, and trust in relationships. Right, that's not to do with marriage, particularly. I can talk about the kind of partner I want to be involved with and what I would bring to a relationship. Again, that's not really to do with marriage. Here we get to it. This is the success criteria. This is what they need to learn about marriage. I understand that adults can be married in a civil partnership or live together. That's it. So basically, they have to know that there's such a thing as marriage. There's such a thing as civil partnership, and there's such a thing as cohabitation. And if the 16, 17, 18-year-olds, whatever, if they leave the school having learnt that, then as far as the Scottish government's concerned, that is success. What a contrast we offer as the Scottish Family Party. Right, next, a little news story here from the Scottish Conservatives. Now, you might have heard something about this. The Scottish Conservatives put people on their list, the regional list for the election, by having a vote. So if you're a member or a supporter of the Conservative Party, you can vote for who you think should be top of the list. And you get a certain number of votes out of all the candidates. But what happened this time? Instead of just trusting it to the members and supporters, Ruth Davidson and Douglas Ross and the leadership of the party, they decided they would help the voters, just in case they weren't quite sure who they ought to be voting for. So what they did was they recommended certain candidates. And I've got here the paperwork that was sent out. So you've got one booklet that says, endorsed by Ruth Davidson and her selection committee. Then you get another booklet of candidates that were just not. They're just the common or garden ones. Obviously, if you're not endorsed, most people don't know these people from Adam. So you really are doomed. And that's what's happened. And that's what happened, for example, to Gordon Lyndhurst, who's a Conservative list MSP in Lothians. He's a Christian, I understand. I've met him, but I don't know him well. He's someone that once spoke out a little bit about some of the bizarre anti-male feminism in the Scottish Parliament, only a tiny little bit. But I remember seeing him doing it and thinking, that could well be you done for. And lo and behold, that's what's happened. He didn't get the seal of approval from Ruth Davidson, so he's now down at number 7 or 8 on the list or whatever, and he won't be an MSP anymore. Now, I mean, that's unfortunate. That's quite a tough story for him. But on the other hand, I just think, what do you expect? You went and joined the Conservative Party. What did you think was going to happen if you actually, in even the most timid sort of way, spoke from a socially conservative perspective? That's what's going to happen. And that's what's happened to him. I was thinking of suggesting to the Conservatives that instead of just endorsing them, on the ballot paper, I thought they could put like a dotted cross where they want people to put their cross to select people. I thought that might be a bit easier for them. But anyway, that's a little bit of news from the Conservative Party. Right, you might have seen that this week the Scottish Parliament passed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. And there's been great rejoicing. The SECC was lit up in various colours to celebrate this momentous occasion. All the children involved in the youth parliament and this, that, and the other saying how wonderful it is. Just an experiment. I mean, if you've got kids, just ask your own kids how excited they are about it. And yeah, they probably never even heard of it. Anyway, but these ones who've been programmed by the government, they're just overjoyed by it. And the government's saying, oh, look what we've achieved this week. We've incorporated this children's rights law into Scots law. But I've spoken about this before. But it's basically a way of undermining adult authority, undermining parental authority and replacing it by the state. So children's rights are named person scheme Mark II. It really is that simple. They didn't manage to get the named person scheme through, but this is effectively doing the same thing. Now, sometimes I think campaigns in Scotland tend to be a bit law focused. So, for example, there's a campaign against the smacking ban. But what about the wider issue that they're basically against punishment full stop? That's a bit harder to campaign against. Same with the freedom of speech. There was a campaign against the hate speech legislation. What about the wider issue of freedom of speech? Same here. There was a campaign against the named person scheme legislation. What about the wider issue of the government's trying to undermine parental authority and supplant parental authority? Now, recently I've got this, I'm quite interested in human rights. So I've got this book from Oxford University Press, a textbook about human rights from a university course. It was absolutely deadly boring. It was appalling. Anyway, so I skipped ahead to the children's human rights chapter. And I was just amazed by what I read, because what I read was exactly what I'd been thinking, having just seen human rights in action in Scottish schools and from the Scottish government, children's rights in action. So I'm going to read a bit to you to see what it says. So this is in the Oxford University textbook on human rights. So this is not some sort of wacky fringe view. This is here in the textbook. But will anyone, I haven't heard a single person outside the Scottish Family Party raise this issue in Scotland. Not a single MSP, no one in the media, no campaigning organisations, absolutely no one. It's Scottish Family Party versus everyone else on this issue. But I think when we do present our case, people are convinced and they can see what we mean. Anyway, so to read from the textbook. Despite the inherent need for third-party advocacy, the agent's accountability to the child is not addressed by the children's rights advocates. Insofar as the question is addressed, it is questioning the moral agency of parents. So when they're talking about who looks after parents, who's responsible for them, well, it questions the role of parents. Indeed, the ultimate rationale for children's rights lies in the problematizing of parental moral agency. The central reason for children's rights is to undermine parental authority, basically. I mean, that's what the sentence is saying. Right, as Geraldine Van Buren observes, the convention challenges the concept that family life is always in the best interest of the children, and the parents are always capable of deciding what is in the best interests of children. Does that remind you of the Scottish government? That is exactly the view of the Scottish government. Parents are just bungling, old-fashioned amateurs. It's the professionals paid for by the government. They're the people who really know what's best for children. So what we need to do is create a system where the professionals can make the decisions instead of leaving children at the mercy of these bungling, old-fashioned amateurs called parents. That's exactly what they want to do. That's what the named person scheme is about. That's what children's rights are about, as it says here in the Oxford University Press textbook. Anyway, continuing. Children's rights effectively empower officials in relation to parents. What was the named person scheme all about? Putting a state official in a position above parents. Children's rights effectively empower officials in relation to parents. I actually tweeted to the No to Named Person campaign saying it's time to wake up again and swing into action, because they're doing the same thing, but no one's opposing it this time. They're getting away with it completely. I say no one, I mean, apart from the Scottish Family Party. Children's rights effectively empower officials in relation to parents, rather than empowering children. As such, children's rights advocacy, while often characterized as comparable to earlier civil rights movements, departs from the beliefs of these struggles. They try and make out it's like children are oppressed because they're not treated the same as adults. So children need to be liberated from adult authority. And when we do that, children will be genuinely happy and free when they're liberated from their parents' authority. I mean, how mad can you get? But that's what they think. While classic civil liberties essentially embody freedoms from state interference, the expanding children's rights framework represents a trend towards external governance of interpersonal relations. That's in academic speech. Translation, government interfering in family life more. That's what children's rights are all about. Government interfering more in family life. Accordingly, children's rights advocacy is skeptical about the autonomy of the private sphere associated with classic civil liberties and about the idea of the free and equal moral citizen. In other words, a private sphere, autonomy in the private sphere, in other words, in family life. So children's rights advocates are a bit suspicious of private family life. They don't trust it. They want to get in there and basically have things done their way. Critics warn Children's rights advocacy is empowering the state to discipline ordinary people for departing from preferred professional parenting norms. How often have we said that? That's what we're always saying. That's what the smacking ban is about. Do it the state's way, otherwise we will discipline the parents, discipline ordinary people for departing from preferred professional parenting norms. That's what it's all about. And it risks giving a license to repressive state powers and undermining human rights. Remember the judgment from the Supreme Court about the named person scheme, about its, well, it talked about totalitarian states, etc., trying to get at the children. Children's rights, exactly the same thing. So when you hear children's rights, just think named person scheme Mark II. And it's that dangerous and it needs to be opposed. And that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. At the moment, the only way to oppose it or to get behind people opposing it is to support the Scottish Family Party, because everyone else seems oblivious to it. I mean, wouldn't it be fascinating if we had here, say, Mary Todd, the children's minister, or John Swinney, or Nicola Sturgeon? I mean, who knows? Or, Jamie Green, the Conservatives' education spokesman. If we said to him, right, what do you think about this? Children's rights undermine parental authority. What do you think they'd say? I think they'd just be utterly confused. They think, no, I don't know what you're talking about. No one's ever said that to us. They'd just be a total blank, because they live in a bubble. I mean, this children's rights thing, I mean, it's right the way through education. I just looked at this. This is from my friends at the General Teaching Council of Scotland, a children's rights-based approach guide for teachers. And it tells you what, I mean, it's just totally contentless. The rights have really got nothing to do with Scottish children. Don't torture them. You can't make them serve in military conflicts below the age of 16 and things. I mean, it's totally irrelevant to the life in Scotland. But if you look at the end, they tell you what it's going to achieve, this human rights-based approach. Rights-based approaches mean that the articles of the convention underpin the ethos of an organization, and that all policies and practices are developed through consideration of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. So what impact is this going to have? Paying attention to these rights of the child. Improved pupil-teacher relations. No, it's not going to do that. It undermines adult authority. And to be honest, tends to turn children into barrack room lawyers who think no one's got the right to tell me what to do. Improved peer relations across the school age ranges. No. Improved teaching and learning. I mean, how is it? It's like they think this is some sort of magic fairy dust. You sprinkle it around your school and just everything gets better. Put up enough rights posters and it all works out. A reciprocal sense of feeling valued, trusted, and appreciated. Life skills such as teamwork, problem solving, and citizenship. I mean, these are nothing to do with the actual rights in the convention. It's the religion substitute for Scottish schools. It's just bizarre. Just the number of people, I mean, the word sheep comes to mind, who will just follow this blindly and parrot the terms, and it spreads like wildfire. It's a fascinating phenomenon. Anyway, that's a little bit about children's rights. How else are we supposed to prevent child abuse and bring abusers to justice? How else apart from what? What, apart from like having investigations and criminal prosecutions? Rowan, if you make it clear, I mean, are you meaning how are we supposed to do it without children's rights legislation? Well, the answer is the way we've already been doing it without children's rights legislation, if that's what you mean. Honor your mother and father. Yeah, now that's an interesting one. Our manifesto does actually say that part of the school curriculum should be to teach children to respect, honor, whatever, their parents and adults in general. But in Scottish education, it's the opposite. The idea is that you don't need to show any particular respect to adults. You don't need to be obedient either, because you've got your rights. You should have equality with adults. Right, let's move on. Right, Rowan seems to be getting confused. I mean, Rowan, it's not too difficult, is it? I mean, surely you can see that respecting, honoring, obeying, etc. parents is the route to harmonious and happy family life, and it's the best context for children to grow up in. They need that security. Now, if some parents have been abusive, obviously that's the exception, and that needs to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that's entirely uncontroversial. Right, let's move on to another story. Again, friends at the General Teaching Council of Scotland get a mention in this one as well. This is about a student in Edinburgh who took mind-bending LSD, and in a resulting scuffle with policemen, he tried to bite 2 constables. I think he might have actually succeeded in biting one of them, if I remember rightly. Anyway, so on drugs, sort of attacking policemen, trying, if not succeeding, in biting them. Right, so it went to court. Guilty. He did it. So what was the sentence? The judge said, I'm going to let him off. And they let him off because he was training to be a teacher. And if he didn't let him off, this criminal record would have had to be reported to the GTCS, and it might have been, well, it wouldn't have been the end of his teaching career. It would have been at least a 2-year break in his teaching career. I mean, how bizarre is that? So in other words, if this boy had been, a mechanic at the local garage, then, oh yeah, fine him or send him to prison or whatever, teach him a lesson. But if he's training to be a teacher, well, obviously you let him off. Because if you have like totally irresponsible, violent people becoming teachers, I mean, that doesn't matter so much. I mean, if it's a mechanic, you've got to nail him. But if someone is going to be a teacher, well, we don't need to worry about that so much, do we? I mean, it's bizarre, utterly bizarre. There was a similar story a few months ago where, again, a student was convicted for basically sexually abusing, I think, a very young child, a toddler or even a baby. And they were convicted, found guilty. But the judge says, because you're training to be a dentist, I don't want to spoil your whole career. So, unconditional discharge or whatever they call it, that's it. It's not going to be on your record at all. It's going to be a dentist, someone who has children under anesthetic in the chair in front of him. And it doesn't matter the fact that he's convicted for sexually abusing a young child. But again, if it had been, say, working in the warehouse at Asda, oh yeah, nail him. I mean, prison, throw the book at him. But if he's trained to be a dentist, oh, well, that's a different matter. We can let him get away with it. There's, first of all, the madness about that is backwards. These should be the people who are most concerned about bringing into line and making it clear their character failings, basically. But aside from that, there's just the sheer injustice. Imagine if you are the Tesco warehouse man or whatever, who gets nailed for one of these things, and you know full well that if you'd have been training to be a doctor or whatever, you would have got away with it. Also, what message does it send to trainee teachers, dentists, doctors? Will they start thinking, we'll get away with it. Don't worry about it. Bite a policeman, sexually abuse a baby, or it'll probably be okay because I'm going to be a doctor or a teacher. Something's going far wrong there. And again, I didn't really see any adverse comment about that either. Right, how are we doing? I've got any comments here. Right, Rowan saying is not a troll. Ali, hello, Ali. So it's been like the more money you've got, higher position, the more likely you are to get off. I would imagine, getting a better lawyer might help. Whether that's generally true, I don't know. I'll be open to look at the research. There's very strong research to show that women get shorter sentences for the same crime compared to men. I mean, that's very, very convincing. In fact, the SNP were considering not too long ago abolishing women's prisons. So if a woman was sentenced to a custodial sentence for murder or whatever, well, there would never be a custodial sentence because there wouldn't be such a thing as women's prisons. I don't know if that's still on the cards. Right, what have we got next? We've got a little leaflet here that came through the door a while ago from Daniel Johnson, Labour MSP. That's quite interesting. It tells you, got his picture on, smiling picture on the front, telling you about all the wonderful things he's doing, giving his view on this, that, and the other. He's here to listen, here to help. It's just like an election leaflet, basically. But I'm sure Daniel would like to thank you for paying for it, because you did. Because this was paid for by the Scottish Parliament. In other words, paid for out of your taxes. Now, you'll notice it doesn't say Labour Party on. That wouldn't be allowed. But it's in Labour Party colours. And people will obviously associate, he's a Labour Party MSP. So the MSPs between them have created a system whereby they're allowed to send out promotional material about themselves at your expense. So when you see these things flooding through your letterbox at various points on the earth, think, wow, that must be pretty expensive to get that done. Just think, it is pretty expensive, and you pay for it as well. And I'm sure the MSPs are very happy with that system. Right, what else have we got? Here's one. This was quite remarkable. This was in the Herald. Now, you'll be aware of the social justice mindset, whereas you look at any issue and you look at statistics for different groups, and if any particular group is having slightly worse outcomes on some measure or other, then that's some sort of injustice. The government needs to step in and needs to solve the problem so the statistics are entirely equal between all groups. So what we've got here is a mental health charity complaining about mental health pay discrepancies and the lack of people with mental health problems in on company boards or leading businesses. So someone's got anxiety and depression. It actually positively says that sometimes the reason these people don't get the top jobs is because they're off work quite a lot because of, for example, anxiety and depression. But they're saying this is obviously unfair and steps need to be taken so that people with anxiety, depression, etc., are equally represented at all points of the hierarchy within an organization. And again, this is reported in the Herald with no contrary view, as though this is just perfectly obvious. But it, as far as I'm concerned, it's perfectly obvious that it's just, I don't know, words fail me. I mean, is it not apparent that suffering from anxiety and depression, okay, which you would sympathize with anyone who's suffering from those very real problems, but those things are not positive attributes when it comes to performing at a very high level in a very demanding, responsible position. They're not strengths on your CV. Also, missing work regularly for these things, they're not strengths in terms of accessing the top jobs. And yet all they think they need to do is to measure the statistics, find an inequality, and that's it. You're off. This is not fair. Something needs to be done. So how long will it be before companies start publishing their mental health pay gaps? And how long will it be before you're thinking, oh, I really fancy that top job. If I want to boost my chances, I better say I'm depressed and have have a week off a couple of times a year, and that might boost my chances. But it's bizarre. Again, that seems to be my favorite word today, but it is bizarre. Right, what do we got here? Okay, if you can't go to work and hold down a job, you can't expect to be promoted. I'm excited that you wouldn't. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's very honest. And yeah, I mean, it's any reason that means you're not going to be able to perform the job at some point in time regularly. I mean, that is something that is a weakness on your CV, if you like. Right, this is a report from the Daily Mail. Catholic schools sparks backlash after teaching pupils that gay sex is wrong. Basically, it goes on to other things. You can imagine the other things included. So that was a news story. So Catholic school teaches Catholic teaching. Got a headline in the Daily Mail. The school defended itself. That was great. But just contrasted that. When we contacted the Daily Mail and say the Scottish government is promoting pornography in schools, and there's all sorts of vulgar and corrupting sex education, we touch on the whole shocking lot of it. What do they say? Well, they don't say anything. They're not interested. They'll never publish an article on it. We show them poll results showing the huge numbers of the huge proportion of the Scottish population saying, no, there's something wrong here. publish that? No, that's a non-story. Not interested. Yet when a Catholic school teaches Catholic teaching, gets a headline, and that's a story in the Daily Mail. Now, there's another story. This is from the Telegraph, just recently as well, about Winchester College. I mean, very posh boys' boarding school down in the south of England. There was a controversy there about sex education, and it was things like the boys had been taught that if you have sex when you're 14, you won't be prosecuted. I mean, that's the fact in Scotland. I mean, you won't be prosecuted unless it's someone over the age of 17. And there's also lots of sort of pro-trans teaching. And the school responded by saying, parents may find some of this material new and thought-provoking. In other words, we're not going to listen to anything the parents saying. We just think, they're obviously a bit naive and ignorant, and they need educating as well. So that was a report in the Telegraph. But again, I thought, how come a controversy like that in one single school gets a story in the Telegraph, whereas what's going on in Scottish schools, which is far worse and on an industrial scale, can't make any appearance in the media at all? Now, you can imagine the Telegraph, that they might think, a story about Winchester College, that fits in with our, sort of upper crust profile or whatever. I don't know. But it's very frustrating, the fact that the issue with Scottish sex education, that the government doesn't come under fire. And basically, one reason is the politicians won't bring it up. But the main reason is the media. They seem allergic to raising this issue. So the Daily Telegraph, Winchester College, one single school, few parents kicking up a fuss, story. Scotland, industrial scale, through the whole country, much worse, not interested. Doesn't get any attention at all. Right, let's again, we're back to my friends at the General Teaching Council of Scotland. Their magazine, I get their magazine for the time being, and there's an article in it here, The Future of High Stakes Assessment, a new normal or better normal for examinations in Scotland. Now, if you've been following the family party for a while, you'll realize what's coming here, but this is just an example, evidence that what I'm saying is true. Because the big picture is that in Scottish education, it's dominated by a very liberal, progressive mindset. So the whole idea of testing and exams, they don't like it. They prefer much more woolly things. As long as everyone's happy and having a nice time, that's what really counts. We don't really need to know who's good at things and who isn't, because that's all a bit elitist. All exams measure is who's good at taking exams, and this sort of thing, which is totally untrue. And the other obsession in Scottish education is closing the attainment gap, whereas at the moment, pupils in wealthier areas perform better than pupils in less well-off areas. And Nicola Sturgeon said her number one mission is to close the attainment gap. They've been throwing money at it for years, buying teddies for kids in poor areas or whatever, and basically got nowhere. There's an article today I saw published where a professor at Edinburgh University was saying the attainment gap has closed slightly, but the reason it's closed is that the pupils in the wealthy areas have got worse. Their standard of attainment has gone down, so the attainment gap has been closed a little bit. So great success for the SNP. They'll be delighted to see the attainment gap going down slightly. But anyway, getting on to my main point. So last year, of course, the exams were cancelled. The teachers made the grades up. The teachers in poorer areas, schools in poorer areas, tended to be even more wildly optimistic than the teachers in wealthier areas. And initially, the Scottish Qualifications Authority tried to even it out, but then there was a bit of a fuss, so they didn't. So they just let the grades stand. And so, lo and behold, what's happened? The attainment gap has been closed to a significant degree. So lots of people are now saying, oh, well, look, we've cracked it. This is how you close the attainment gap. It must be exams that penalize pupils in poor areas. If we just do away with exams, let the nice teachers make up the grades, then we can fulfill our target of closing the attainment gap, because let's face it, everything else we've tried has been a total failure. And so there's people now saying, this is what we need to do permanently. The Greens in the Scottish Parliament are definitely down that line, where the Greens lead, all the other parties follow, with the Conservatives being, trotting along at the end, trying to keep up. John Swynn has already said he's very open to considering this sort of thing. So we get to the magazine. The future of high stakes assessment, not objective assessment, high stakes. So let's look at the quote. There's a little quote sort of highlighted here. It says, "It is the use of assessment evidence for qualifications that makes the process high stakes. For qualifications are used to allocate scarce resources." So in other words, it's all too stressful, too tough, too high stakes for the pupils. A much fairer system would be something that wasn't so objective. So they didn't know, right, this is it. This is when you have to perform in order to show what you'll do. So I will repeat my prophecy that exams in Scotland, their days are numbered. There's going to be a real push towards doing away with them completely. I'm not sure exactly which will go first. They've already gone at National 4, but I think slowly but surely, or maybe quickly, who knows, exams are going to become a thing of the past. I mean, let's imagine exams are on properly next year. If you're supposed to be sitting advanced hires next year, won't those pupils say, "Oh, but I've never sat an exam before. I didn't do National 5s, they were cancelled. I didn't do my hires, they were cancelled. This is the first time I've ever done an exam. This is not fair." And, you know, if they make a couple of placards, "John Swinney's not being nice, he's making me worried about my exam," what's going to happen then? Is John Swinney going to say, "No, exams are back on. You've got to sit your exam. You know, you can do some practice, but you've got to go ahead"? I'm not so sure. I think it's quite likely the answer could be, "Oh, yes, we understand. Yeah, so it wouldn't really be fair to give you exams this time." So we'll see. I think exams are on their way out. Right, a few other things we've got here. And this is a great one. The drugs deaths in Scotland, obviously tragic levels, absolutely appalling. This is a report from the Scottish Drug Deaths Task Force. And they've got to the heart of what needs to be done to tackle all these drug deaths. And do you know what it is? Do you know where they need to focus the effort and the resources? Where does progress need to be made? The key thing is to tackle stigma. That's what they think. Tackle stigma. It's not to stop people taking drugs. It's not to cut off the supply of drugs. It's not to teach people how harmful drugs are. It's not to change the culture in society so people become more hostile to the idea of taking drugs. No, it's the opposite. You've got to reduce the stigma of taking drugs. So if someone thinks, "Oh, shall I take drugs?" they'll think, you know, people will be really accepting of that. It won't be a problem. And they think that's the solution to it. I mean, talk about ideology blinding people to the obvious. But that's what you get. Again, I mean, who paid for this report? Obviously, you. Your taxes would pay for this. But this is the advice that the Scottish government is getting itself. To tackle drug deaths, you need to tackle stigma. Like everything comes down to feelings. So the real issue isn't that they're addicted to a destructive drug and are committing crimes and it's wrecking their health. The real issue is people are looking down on them a little bit. And if you can just solve that problem, the rest, everything else will fall into place. It's a total fantasy world. It's as though they wish that was the way it was. And so they pretend it is the way it is, but it's totally, totally detached from reality. Right, let's have a look. What's Daniel got to say here? Big news this week, tragic case of Sarah Everard. Yeah, sadly, the reflex has been to turn this into a battle of the sexes. Absolutely. Okay, talk about what positive things the SFP has to say about improving character formation for young people and strengthening the criminal justice system. Yeah, the issue with crimes like this. Well, let's go for the battle of the sexes aspect first of all. About a quarter of murder victims in Britain are female, 3/4 are male. But if you listen to the Scottish Parliament, I mean, you wouldn't even know that there was such a thing as a male murder, because the talk is always about violence against women and girls, and it's the battle of sexes mentality. Now, I mean, some people use this sort of popular term, man-hating feminists, and I wouldn't throw that around. I wouldn't necessarily accuse people of hating, but you can see why people do use that term. when you hear someone in the Scottish Parliament, they delight in being able to point out a fault in men in general, wherever they find some statistic that shows men are more prone to some sort of bad behavior. So yeah, that's the battle of the sexes aspect is very important. The other thing is general impulse control as well. An important part of growing up is learning to control your impulses. Sometimes you want something, but you can't have it, and that's just tough. You've just got to accept it and move on. But the message in Scottish schools is, if you say no to children, it might damage their well-being, it might upset them. Really, you should negotiate and try and work out a compromise or something. So the tendency is to produce young people who, when they hear, well, no, you can't do that, they tend to think, excuse me, no, you can't speak to me like that. We'll compromise here. And so I think that mindset leads to a lack of inhibition, a lack of self-control into all sorts of areas of life. I think that's very important. And I think the aspect of sexual morality is very important as well. Put some things on Facebook this week. Pornography has been demonstrated to lead to, acceptance of sexual violence and actually to, a propensity to sexual violence as well. So the Scottish government is positively promoting something to young people that it's conclusively shown is going to lead to the attitudes and mindsets that lead to sexual assaults, particularly on women. And they just can't put two and two together. It's like with the drugs thing. They've got their ideology. It's just, if we can tackle stigma, that will do it. The same with this. They think if you could tackle inequality. So they really do think if we could just have another 20 MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, women wouldn't get attacked in dark alleys. If we just had a few more, women leading big companies, that would help solve the problem. But it wouldn't. That's nothing to do with the problem at all. The problem is a very small number of men who either basically lack moral standards, or they lack self-control, or equally well, they might have some sort of mental health problem, or might be on drugs, drunk, or whatever. I mean, that's another factor with this. A pretty significant proportion of violent crime, or crime in general, actually, is committed by people under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So that needs to be a pretty powerful message as well to deliver in society. So yeah, that's it. I mean, just on the same sort of issue here. This is something again from the Scottish government very recently. They want more women starting businesses, and they calculated if more women would start businesses and achieve more with them, then they could make an extra £13 billion. I mean, what a crazy statistic is that? I think what they've done is they've said if you look at how much money is made by male entrepreneurs, business leaders, whatever, if you imagine the same amount was made by females doing those things, then Scotland would have an extra £13 billion. I mean, what a crude and ridiculous calculation to make. That's about as sensible as saying, there's a really big business at this roundabout. If there was a big business at every roundabout in Scotland, think how much money we'd have then. I mean, it's that standard of thinking. But so as usual, it goes completely unchallenged. So the push is always, women should be doing these things. Not, we want to support women to do what they choose to do. We want more women to be starting businesses and being high up in companies. We don't care what women want. We don't care whether that's actually what more women want to do or not. It's what we as the government know is what would be best for women. Totally unchallenged. 1 minute to go. Very quickly. Got this from the government recently. Did you get one of these through your door? About the organ donation. And it's about the change in the law that happened it's a while ago now. So basically now the government will take your organs unless you opt out of the scheme. It used to be you carried a donor card or you signed up in some way. That's not the case anymore. The case now is the government sort of acts as though they own your body when you, as they think, have finished with it. As the Scottish Family Party, we think this is wrong, and we would reverse that rule. But this leaflet, I mean, they make it as benign as possible. Actually, underneath it, it's quite chilling that a government would think it could take that approach. I just looking at some of the comments here, just going back to the violence against women thing. There was a story in one of the tabloids today. It was pretty awful. It's about a woman basically murdering her child. I won't go into any more details than that, but it's pretty horrific. I mean, would anyone dream of saying, look what this woman's done here? Women need to really unite and condemn this sort of behavior. It really is time women got their act together with this. I mean, that would just be seen as totally ridiculous, wouldn't it? Yeah, and it would be seen as very offensive as well. And yet exactly the same thing happens with men routinely. Right, I've only got a couple of things left, but I will stick to time because an hour has passed by. Just a reminder, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, you can come to our online manifesto launch. That's as usual on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. It'd be great to see you there and bring a question. If you want to chip in a final bit for our crowdfunder, so last time I checked, we were just about £1,000 short of our £20,000 overall target. So if you did want to chip in, that would be much appreciated. So thanks very much for the comments, everyone, and see you in the morning, and if not, next week. Right. Good night.